Good morning. It is Friday, August 16th, 2024. It is 10 o'clock, and this is a special meeting of the Jefferson Public Utility District Board of Commissioners. My name is Jeff Randall. I am president of the board, and I'm calling this meeting to order. Jefferson PUD will be offering both virtual online meetings as well as in-person meetings unless advance notice is provided. Online participant audio will be muted upon entry. Please unmute at the appropriate time to speak. And if you are calling in, use *6 to mute and unmute and *9 to raise a hand to request to speak. Can we have a roll call of commissioners? My name is Jeff Randall, District 1 Commissioner and President of the Board.
Kenneth Collins, Commissioner, District 2.
Dan Tupper, Commissioner for District 3.
Hey, we have a quorum. Next item on the agenda is review the agenda, and we have the draft budget and an executive session scheduled at the end of the meeting. Is there any changes proposed for the agenda? Commissioners, I'll accept the motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second the motion.
Motion and a second to approve the agenda. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion is approved. Agenda is approved. PUD 2025 draft budget. Who's leading us?
I'm going to start. Okay. So Mike is presenting the budget today. Mike has worked on this budget. He's done a very good job. I'd like to just thank him and his team for the work they do. And I'll turn it over to Mike. Thank you. I guess I could keep talking so we don't have dead silence.
I was making sure I got the actual slide presentation up and not. I was trying to make sure I actually had the slide presentation up and not the note side, my side of it up. So today we are going to go over the 2025 preliminary budget. We're going to do it a little bit different than what we've done in the past. In the past, we've brought up the the PDF file of the budget, and this year we're going to do it a little bit different, where we're going to kind of do a PowerPoint presentation and just hit some of the highlights of the budget. So with that, before we get started at the 25 budget,
and Mike, just to pause on that, you did send out to the commissioners a PDF of the draft budget. Can that be made available to the public also?
Yeah, so that one, yeah, so based on the days, because we have to have it posted just as a timeline before we get too far into this. We have to post it by the first Monday in September. We have to post something on our website. We have 30 days prior to our budget hearing, which is the first Monday in October. It may change. It will probably change between now and then, even posting. So, because
would you rather wait until?
I would rather wait until closer to the first Monday of September.
Okay.
To post it, just because I know after today's meeting there may be some changes that need to be made.
Okay.
I know there are some tweaks that do need to be made in there. Okay. With my schedule, Kevin's schedule, we haven't really sat down and talked about the numbers too much. He's seen it. He has, we're good with it presenting today.
Okay.
But there are some tweaks that need to be done before we actually get it posted.
Well, thank you. Even though you're going to go through the presentation, the PowerPoint, thanks for providing the numbers behind it. It was helpful to have.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to highlight some of the things today, but before we move into the 25, I want to take a few minutes to look back at 23 and 24, how we finished up in 23, because we just had our financial audit presentation last week from our auditor, Tyler Kennedy with BSGM. And then we've done our fund reports, and then how we're doing in 24 so far. So just wanted to we used the FIT tool from the state auditor's office, and they compared us to 32 other PUDs, and we ranked 17th in revenues for 23 with $52.7 million. We ranked 18th in expenses at $39.3 million. And according to the state auditor's office, our financial health is good. So that's from that. That's all the information. That's as a combined utility. Then we have our 2023 key ratio trend analysis. This is from CFC. It's the National Rural Finance Cooperative Finance Corporation. Had to remember what everything actually means. And they take all of our year-end Form 7 that we commit, that we send into RUS. They take the information from that and a bunch of utilities, all the co-ops from across the US, and do some comparison ratios for us. So I just wanted to highlight a few ratios. The first one is the ratio 6. It's the tier ratio. So you can see where our tier, we're actually just below the state median of the ratio.
So Mike, this was a little confusing to me. Can you just really quickly go over the lines and the columns and?
So the column, oh, yes.
And
So
what
the
that
columns is ours. So the WA, that's our identification. The WA 060 is our identification for RUS, for CFC. That's our utility designation.
Okay.
And then the US total, that little green line is the US total. So that's the average for all co-ops across the US.
Okay.
And then the yellow line is the state average
For public utilities or?
for mostly co-ops in the state of Washington.
Okay,
Not all because not all the public utility districts follow the RUS guidelines and do the Form 7s.
okay.
So when we're comparing ourselves to the state within the state of Washington, we're comparing to the co-ops
Thank you for.
that follow because they follow the RUS guidelines.
Okay, thank you for that. It's a simple graph, but I didn't really understand the meaning behind. the
Yeah,
thing, so that's
and these
really
graphs,
cool.
we get them every year. We haven't always provided them to the board. I mean, I've sent them out, but we haven't really talked about
Okay,
some of these. So that's why I wanted to include them this year a little bit. So so you can see our tier is a little bit less than in 23. You know, we've been kind of below average for the state, suffering 22, but right there. And the reason we are so much higher than the US total is the state of Washington requires us to record our aid to construction, our grant revenues, things like that as non-operating revenue and not as offsetting to our assets. And Commissioner Collins, you have a question?
I do have a question. So are there structural reasons why co-ops would report somewhat differently than our PUD?
As far as like for RUS and CFC, they all report like what we do, but the PUDs report differently because they can follow different guidelines. We follow the FERC accounting, which is RUS standards, and our reporting, which the co-ops also follow that the same accounting standards that we do for RUS and for CFC. I think.
and Ken, this all comes back to our loan, RUS loan, and we have to do the Form 7s that you probably remember. And the other PUDs that don't have that aren't bothering
Yeah.
to do this, so they don't have this report card like we do.
Yeah.
Understood.
So.
Good question.
The next one is the debt service coverage. So how much that we can cover our debt service, the principal and interest. You can kind of, there again, the blue bars, the blue columns are ours, is our own utility. The green bars, the state US total, the average for the US, and then the yellow is the state. So you can see that we are below, we're above the US totals the last couple of years, but below the state on the debt service coverage. So.
And could you talk a little bit, Mike, on both these graphs? It's showing us inching up in 22 and 23. The numbers are better on that last graph and this graph. Could you maybe highlight some of the things that are helping that?
Well, it's because it's taken into account our non-operating revenues, which we in 22 and 23, we started getting some of
Okay.
our grant funds in there. So this is looking at the entire picture
Okay,
of, and this is just the electric side of things. This isn't water
right.
on all these graphs here. This is only looking at the stuff that we've report on the electric side, which is our broadband, including our broadband.
So in reality, we're more steady. All these indicators would be
Yeah.
pretty level.
Yeah, normally the 19, 20, 21 is probably on average where we're going to be in the next few years. You're going to see that climb go up and up on our columns because of the grant money coming in and how we have to record it. So. Then this is just another one that they do is the total operating revenue per kW sold. they're in Mills, which let me switch. I gotta look up my other screen here on my computer for a second. Cause I put a note in here so I could read what the mill was. So a mill is just 1/10 of a cent used as a measure of electric energy bought and sold. So that's just how they calculate this column. So you can see that we are right pretty on level with the state on this one. Below average for the US, but pretty much on average with the state of Washington on this one. This is our total operating expenses per total KWH sold, again in mills. You know, there again, it's slowly increasing, but we, you know, have had a lot of growth, especially with the broadband coming on. So our operating expenses are starting to climb up a little bit, but we're still just below the state average and just slightly higher than the US average. So
Back on the operating revenue per kilowatt hour sold, is that reflective of rates? So if you have a higher electric rate, then your revenue is gonna be better. And if you have a lower electric rate, your revenue is gonna be less per kilowatt hour sold. Is that? gonna be-
yeah, I mean, yeah, a lot of it is, you know, yeah, it's your operating, so it's based on your rates
I'm
and stuff.
guessing our numbers being lower than the US total is our rates are probably lower on average than
Yeah, being,
rates in the US.
and the one thing I didn't include, I could, part of the, what CFC does too, they also do by your power supplier. So I could have put the BPA power supplier mark in there too. I didn't include it this time. But where you can match up and see which most of the state of Washington is BPA anyways. I mean, as far from the co-ops, they don't have a lot of generation. So yeah, it is based on the rates there.
Thank you.
And then, yeah, this is just the total operating expenses per total KWH sold. So how much, you know, we're getting from, you know, of our rates are going to pay to operate the system. We're right there in line with both the state and the US totals. So. And then just looking at the 24 year to date through June, operating revenues on the electric side, a little over $24 million. Total cost of service is just under 23 million. So we got about 1.5 million in net operating margins. We got about $1 million in non-operating margins. So our total margins for the year are $2.5 million on the electric side. On the water side, we're just a little over $2 million in revenues, 1.9 in total cost of service. The net operating, so about 200,000 in net operating margins, 117,000 in non-operating margins so have brought in about 320,000 in margins. Commissioner Tupper?
Yeah, so I have a question as it relates to our current budget, and revenues have been trending down this year to the tune of 7.8, according to the report you sent out to us, 7.8% on the electric side. So should we have by budget seen more like a $4 million margin? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, because of the way the revenues have played out so far this year and that trajectory, I'm just looking at next year's budget as to what kind of revenues we should be expecting.
I wonder if Mike, that slide where you project out to the end of the year, I wonder
Yeah,
if that would be
some of
helpful
this, some of this information is going to come out here in just a little bit, because I got a couple more slides here that will show our actuals to budget for so far this year and then projected out year end. So I think some of your questions are going to be answered here, Dan, as we keep going through.
Okay, yeah, I just want to get that out there early here so that that's on your mind as you start to explain the stuff of how that all is going to work.
Similar question in terms of that when you project out to the end of the year, how you got there. So I think that'll be a good discussion.
So this is our electric budgets to actuals. You can see, yeah, we're about $2 million below budgeted revenues. We're about $1 million. And so below the total cost of service, puts our net margins down below, 1.3 million below what we thought. The non-operating margins were down also. Part of that's just the, trying to guess when grant money is going to come in and things like that. So yeah, we are about 3 million, about 2.5 million, 3 million below where we thought we would be budget wise.
So the disparity on the non-operating margins on the electric side is primarily grants we didn't get or development that hasn't happened, or I was kind of wondering about that because that's kind of a,
It's partially, we don't know when the grant money is going to come, you budget thinking you don't know when it's going to come in. There's some of it that came in July, but because we're only through June here, it's not showing up
okay.
yet. You try to anticipate how much construction you're going to do, age of construction you're going to receive, may come to tuition, it may not.
Okay.
So it's one of those things where it's off, it's kind of what's happening right now. So
Okay. Kevin, has the development that we're seeing, requests for new service and all that sort of thing, is that different than previous years, or is that pretty typical, would you say?
We're half where we have been in years past.
Hmm.
So construction, from Jimmy's notes, a drastic drop in new construction.
Do we have any ideas why?
Cost of money is more expensive to build new homes. There's just not a lot of available properties to build a new home on that are feasible for a lot of home buyers, so for home builders. So there's a lot going into it right now, but definitely we're half at least. where we
Interesting.
were.
I hadn't heard that previously. Okay, please continue.
Dan's got his hand up.
Oh, go ahead, Dan.
So again, I'm still somewhat concerned about, we're talking here about grant monies impacting this margin, and, broadband has its own budget, and most, if not all of the grant money we have is broadband related, not energy related. So again, I'm having trouble reconciling how exactly we budget around that kind of a breakdown, because I know we're considering the two kind of under the same heading of energy, but I don't think that's fair to the electric customers. So I'm concerned as to how the accounting is going to move forward on margins and revenues and versus expenditures and capital improvement because of all that grant money. I'm just still not sure, how we come up with an accurate electric budget, energy budget.
Well, as far as reporting purposes, we do report both the broadband and the electric as one entity. We do, and as we go through the 25 budget, we do separate them out on a normal basis, but for year-end reporting on the financial statements that were presented last week and the Form 7, they are one entity. We don't separate them out as separate entities. They are considered one entity. We only keep them out just for our own accounting purposes.
For RUS, we report them as one for now.
And again, I understand that, but I'm partly looking at explaining to the public how our rate structure is working, because our rates are going to determine to a certain extent our revenues, primarily going to determine our revenues. And I just want to get this thing out there now that, broadband's not supposed to be revenue positive for 5 years, according to staff. I hope it happens sooner than that. But in the meantime, as we budget things, who's paying for this stuff, beyond the grants? I realize the grant money is there, but there's other monies that are going to be used by the electric side that may not be grant money. So this is the part I'm trying to consider, is how we're going to get the public informed about our rate structure once the cost of service study is done and the rates get set as to how their money is being segregated out.
Maybe when we get to the broadband slides, that'll help a
Joel's-
little bit
And
too.
I'll jump in here too. Part of this, at least on the rate side of things, Dan, that's in a future meeting with FCS when they actually sit down, and they'll break it out to broadband, electric, water, and sewer. That is part of their product they give to the PUD, is to spread those out and let you know that this is the electric budget and what they require, and this is the broadband budget and what they require. So the rate specific question, Dan, will be or is part of FCS's work that they're working on as we speak.
And Mike,
And I-
you're able to take staff that are working for broadband, and I imagine, do we have some staff overlap of staff sometimes working on broadband and sometimes working on
Yeah.
electric? And do we have where they report their hours differently, or
Yes.
how is that tracked?
Yeah, so no, they are. We do report. It's all, we have GL accounts set up, general ledger accounts set up for both the electric and the broadband, and where and how people charge their time and
Okay,
is all accounted that way.
okay.
Separate.
So part of where I'm going with this is for us to really do our due diligence and be able to set a good budget for next year. This rate, this rate study and cost of service is an important component. And so where I'm going is I think we should have a report from FCS very soon, as in before the end of this month, about where we are in that process.
Since Dan's brought it up a couple times, is there an update on when we're planning to be working with FCS and how they are going to engage with us related to budget?
So we are working with FCS. Honestly, there's not going to be a report. The earliest we can get it, it'd probably be the end of September with FCS. And it would be a very, very preliminary number. It will be more of, okay, this is what we did last time. This is where we are this time. As with everything, we're working as fast as we can with FCS, but it will not have a recommendation to the board on rates till 2025.
So are they basically looking at kind of projections in terms of, I mean, we can do the numbers of here's our expenses and here's our revenues, but I'm presuming that they're able to dive into it a little bit and say, here's how your rates are affecting your revenues and maybe here's why. I mean, they'll do some analysis for us on are our rates sufficient to cover our costs, basically.
That's a big part of what they do, is to make sure you can cover your capital work moving forward. And
Okay.
we've talked about this in our capital meetings, that not only is rates part of the equation, but how much capital do you want to accomplish in 2025?
And I imagine this is almost a chicken and egg thing. They need the data just like we do. How are they gonna figure out how are our annual costs and revenues doing until they've got a year's worth of data? I don't know. I mean,
So what they do is they take our capital projects, both water and power, and they put it in their formula. They come up and say, if you do all these things, this is your rate. But they also have to split it out between classes, so the residential, small commercial business, those things. So there are a lot of formulas that they use to boil it down to making sure each customer pays their appropriate share.
okay. I see a question from somebody. Joel. Okay, fire away, Joel. And Dan's got his hand up again.
Thank you. So Mike, I had a question at some point here shortly. Broadband, whether, it covers all of its costs is a different question, but at some point we're going to actually have customers, and where is that revenue going to land and how's it going to impact things like net operating margins?
So the customer revenue is in the operating revenues. So as we get more customers and as we get into the 25 budget, we did budget more for that, for customers being connected. So that would increase our operating revenues, may increase the total cost of service as well as we spend more money servicing those customers, but then that would be all included into the net operating margins there.
And do you expect those the net operating margins to increase despite the increase in cost of service?
Yes. Because we have a lot of the costs already kind of that we've been doing, or we know based on historical information included in the 25 budget for broadband.
And you got another question?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks.
Oh, Dan, sorry. Dan, do you have?
So, So yeah, I'm gonna get a little bit ahead of things here because the board 24 hours ago did get a copy of the draft budget. So part of my line of questioning here revolves around, obviously around revenues and how, how those are going to be calculated, where the money's going to come from, kind of what Joel just talked about. But I think that, again, this shows some of the components I think that are still missing for us to do this budget. Are we or are we not going to do a capacity fee? Obviously we talked already about what our rate structure is going to look like. It's going to have to change next year because we're in the current rate schedule. We're on the last leg of that now. So at some point before next June, we have to determine what the next round of rates is going to look like. So, and that's going to happen mid-budget next year. We know about the property taxes, and we just heard construction could be down. So our construction revenues that we get off fees and engineering and things like that could be down. So there's a whole lot of moving parts here on the revenue side of things. And here's my ask, and that's going to be moving forward, is that we get a detailed account, not just of what the revenue total is, but how we're accounting for what that revenue is and where it's going to come from before we get to a final budget.
So I think at the end of today's meeting, it would be appropriate to have a little bit of commissioner discussion on things like that and on the capacity fee. And I think we can ask questions and leave tasks for staff for next time. Okay, Dawn? Dawn disappeared. There you are. Did you want to say anything, Dawn?
There we go. Since we're tracking broadband already, will we know the effects of any kind of revenue or expenses on the rest of the organization just by the fact that we are now tracking broadband by itself already?
Yes, we are tracking broadband by itself.
So I
So we
think,
should,
I think Don's basically saying we're starting to do this. We're getting some momentum on figuring out
Yeah,
what the costs are, and they're going to change as we get more customers, as you said.
yeah, more customers and just
It's not
more.
like we're starting from zero. We are tracking. We are a moving target right now on the radar
Yeah,
screen.
well, and when we've just recently adding in some of the techs and stuff, we've had some of the other positions, some of the tech positions, we're just now adding and where and how they fall into place.
Okay. Want to keep going, Mike?
Real
Oh,
quick, capacity fees will be on next Tuesday's board meeting.
Okay.
So this is kind of like what Jeff was alluding to a little bit ago, is projecting out the year-end electric. So the actuals, is actuals through June, budget through July through December, based on where it is. The budget was what was approved for 2024. So that's the actuals from January through June, and then what would be on the budget from July to December 31st. And then comparing it to the actual budget that was approved. So you can see, yes, our revenues are down a little bit, down by a couple $1 million, through this projection. Our total cost of service, we got about a $500,000 or so there. Net margins causing our net operating margins to be about 1.3 million difference. We're a little less on the non-operating margins, some of that, is the construction. It's, going in, the grant money coming in. So right now projected, yeah, we're going to be just about $2.5 million or so, between $2.5 and $3 million below what we had originally budgeted.
And is any of that related to weather, loads, things like that, if you know?
Yeah, part of it is going to be, we've had a pretty mild weather. We've had a cold snap back in January that helped a little bit, not much, but for the rest of the year, it's been a pretty mild weather year. So, unfortunately, we are weather dependent up here, and unfortunately, the weather doesn't always cooperate with us on our revenues.
Ken, you had a question?
Legal counsel anticipated my question.
Okay, very good.
So I'm gonna ask Mike, the budgeted numbers, where did that come from?
The budgeted numbers came from it was a 3-year average based on our use on by month for the last, on average for the last 3 years by our revenue classes. And then it was we did it just a swag number, kept the broadband revenues kind of low for a lot, just because we didn't have any information. But for 24, it was a 3-year average on usage based on the current rates.
Okay. Dan, is your hand up again?
Yeah, quick question on that. Maybe you have a slide. I've looked at the presentation, but I may have missed it. But what you just said there, Mike, I get the 3-year or 4-year average we may be doing, but is there a trend, right? Are the revenues starting to trend downward or hold steady? Or, is there a trend in that 3 or 4 year period? I realize we did an average, but is there a trend in there?
I did not look at a trend when I was doing this. I was just looking at the average, Dan. When I budget, I only look at the average. I don't look at the trend, but that is something we can bring back to the commissioners and show how the revenues are trending.
Okay.
So going from the electric side to the water side of things, you can see our year to date. So this is through June. Even on the water revenues, they're a little bit less. They're 200,000 less than what we had budgeted. The total cost of service is less, so that brings our net margin. The net operating margins are higher. We originally budgeted a little bit of a loss, just because it's hard to bring in when you don't have very many water customers, bring in a lot of revenue. Non-operating margins, we're right on track with those. And then just because of the increase in the decrease in the revenues, but the lower total cost of service and the net operating margins, we're doing pretty good on our total margins for the water side of things at 320,000. And then projecting out again through the end of the year for water, the actuals, are the actuals through June, budget through July through December. Budget is what was approved. We're looking like we're going to get just a little bit above total margins. Revenues are going to say a little bit less, but everything else is going to be doing a little bit better on the water side of things projected through the end of the year. So now, since we've looked at the back at some of the history and where we've been and where we're at, I want to jump into the 25 preliminary budget. This is the financial path that will allow the PUD to operate day to day, as well as complete capital projects. So going in, highlighting some of the budget foundations that we're using, the revenues for electric and water based on a 4-year averages and the 2024 rates that are the current rates. Revenues for broadband are based on estimated connections and with the 2024 revenues that were already there. The tax revenues this year, we decided to split 80% to broadband, 20% to water. Last year we did 90 to broadband and 10 to water, so we're giving water a little bit more of the tax money this year. We increased our expenses 3% based on the consumer price index for the last year. It's been on average about 3%. We've budgeted for 17 vacant or new positions. And the capital projects are going to be based on work plans, the needs, and predetermined work areas related to grants. And then something new for 25 is we're putting an emphasis on improving safety and creating a culture around safety. Dan, you have a hand up?
Yeah, I'm going to ask some blunt questions along some of these things here. And we've already talked about a little bit of it and alluded to certain things, but on the revenues, this 4-year average, again, it concerns me, again, on what revenues are really going to be when we talk about adding 17 vacant or new positions, plus what we're already, we're adding to the budget in 2024, which probably all we're budgeted for. And again, as always, I'm going to throw it out there. I don't like the property tax split. I don't think broadband should be receiving any at this point, quite honestly. When we're looking at potential, cost of service, and I don't know what the rate structure is going to look like. 20,000 customers are paying those property taxes. I think all 20,000 customers should be benefiting from that. So again, there's a lot of things here we're going to have discussions about moving forward. I just want to get it out there now early on so staff can, can take these things into account and not have, have me come in later and make these kind of comments. I appreciate everything staff's doing. Don't take me wrong. I'm just trying to make sure we get the best product here at the end of the day that we can, and we've, looked under all the rocks and we've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. So, and then on the emphasis on improving safety and creating culture around safety, I know there's a budget issue this year or a line item issue this year that we didn't see in previous years that you'll probably talk about. Again, that's a budget impact, and I'm not exactly sure, how that thing plays out. So I'm sure we'll hear more about that as well. And I know you probably got more bullets to go.
Dan, since you chimed in on the property tax, I will too. I know for years, the PUD took back when it was just a water utility, it collected property taxes from the entire county and put that towards the water folks. And what do we have, like a couple thousand water? 5,000.
Yeah, about 5,000.
5,200, something like that.
So I look at broadband as something that will benefit the entire county. I want to see, fiber and high-speed broadband everywhere in this county. So I think of that as an all county benefit, whereas the water side, we have we have 5,000 customers out of roughly 30,000 folks in this county that we're providing water to. So the water side is interesting. We had a meeting with county staff. Jimmy and I were there and Bill was on the line. And I started thinking about our water system and how challenging that is for us to operate. And I know the city, when I worked there, we had standards for you have this inch water line going down the streets. And I suspect that our water system, we've got like a different kind of water system with every different water system because it was put in by developers. So I recognize we have challenges on the water side. I recognize it because you don't have that many customers. It's hard to get the rates high enough to cover the costs. But at the same time, I'd like to see that it's a mature business. Nice to get it to where it can cover its own costs and not rely on the property taxes. And I look at our property taxes as something we can invest in areas where we need it, where we'll get returns in the future. And I'm hoping that broadband will eventually not need it. But once we get to the broadband slides, maybe we can talk more about.
And I understand the benefits of broadband. Don't get me wrong. This isn't an anti-broadband bandwagon that I'm on here, but this is an equity issue, right? At the end of the day, what rates are going to be affected by broadband? Is it the broadband rates? Is it the electric rates? Or is it both? I think the people deserve to know where the money that we're charging them for services. If they're not getting broadband services, it's subjective. Maybe they really don't think that it's benefiting the community, and that could be a majority. It could be 51%. I don't know those numbers. I'm not going to take a stab at those numbers, but I'm just saying, to me, it's an equity issue. And with all the grant money that broadband has, maybe at some point down the road, it turns enough money to, cover some other bases. I don't know that. But in the interim, I think in purposes of transparency and good business, we need to be very transparent and very forthcoming about how our rate structures are set and what is benefiting or who is benefiting from those rates.
Please continue.
And the one thing I'll just add, and Joel can jump in here if he needs to, is on the tax revenues, especially for the water side of things, we do have to be careful where and how we use those monies because the city of Port Townsend has their own water department. So there is some restrictions on where and how those funds can be used. So
Yeah, we can't, I'll just tag along that, Mike. I mean, we can't use PUD funds for water services, or we can't use PUD tax funds that somehow touch on programs that are already provided by Port Townsend Water. We're prohibited from doing that. So, and I'll just say, I mean, I to one other point, and I'm sure Commissioner Tupert isn't meaning this, but just to be clear, I mean, the budget process is a very public process. There's nothing that's hidden here. And in fact, it culminates in a public hearing And this commission and staff, I believe, do an excellent job at disclosing all of the budget items and having the full hearing here. So, I think it's important to just make sure that's clear.
And Joel, I didn't quite follow the logic on that. So was your logic that when you're collecting property taxes from part of your county where water service is being provided by somebody else, that we shouldn't be taking those property taxes and using them for water, for something that doesn't benefit them at all? I'm trying to understand.
So, quite some time ago, the PUD was sued by some city of Port Townsend residents on a class action basis, saying that the property tax funds that were used to help purchase Peterson Lake was a violation of the statute that basically says on PUDs essentially can't charge customers who are already receiving utility services from a different public utility. So because Peterson Lake was purchased for storage and recharge purposes and not directly for water, it was appropriate to use property taxes. If not, if we were to use Peterson Lake for water, we'd have to use funds from the water utility, not from property taxes. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think I get it.
I mean, it's a complicated thing, but essentially we can't, Port Townsend water customers can't, who are also electric customers, can't pay property taxes for water services that are provided to other water customers outside the city of Port Townsend. The revenue has to come from a different place and not property taxes.
Water systems that are completely separate from theirs.
Yeah.
Dan, did you have another
Yeah,
follow-up?
one final point of clarification. In the last term that when I used transparency, that was in the context of, yeah, this is a public process. I get all that, but granularity matters. We can throw a lump number out there, but if we don't put anything behind how we got to that number, it's kind of meaningless to a lot of people. So when I say transparency, that is a granularity issue when it comes to the budget in this particular context.
Okay. And Don, your hand's up again.
So one of the things to keep in mind, I never had a budget that didn't change in terms of priorities because of operating circumstances change during the year. The key is how you set up the monitor. And you take a look at things like tier and reserves and other things that suggest how we're doing, and you monitor those on a quarterly basis, and you make changes as you need to throughout the year. So many of the questions that we're getting are going to be important questions to ask during these reviews as you get into the year. Because whether it's 17 vacant positions or capital work that we're looking at, those might have to change based on these indices that tell us how well we're doing. So it's an estimate. It's what we're going to work with on a budget.
It's a roadmap, and when you get there, the terrain might look a little different than you thought it was going to look.
Guarantee it will.
Okay, Mike or Kevin, whoever's going next.
So now to kind of talk about what the thoughts behind some of these numbers. Let's take a quick look at the utility budget. So for operating revenues, we're budgeting about $48.7 million. For the electric side, that's just electric customer side of things. The total cost of service for electric, we're looking at $43.8 million. Gives us operating margins of just under $5 million. With the non-operating margins, $1.8 million, so total margins around $6.8 million. Our net tier, we're budgeting based on these numbers would be 3.63, and our net DSC, debt service coverage, would be 2.47. Now the water side of things, we're budgeting about $5 million in operating revenues. The total cost of service is about $5.5 million. So we're losing about $500,000 in operating margins. Our non-operating margins is 342,000. So total, we're losing about $218,000 in as of right now in the 25 budget. And then on the broadband side of things, with the estimated customers, the estimated connections, we're looking about at $950,000 in operating revenues. The total cost of service is going to be about $2.2 million. So they're going to lose about $1.2 million. The non-operating margins, we got about 11.6. That's kind of a estimate guess on some of the grant funds coming in and everything. So their total margins are about $10 million. I'm looking at it from a cash flow. Commissioner Tupper,
And is that just grant money, basically?
on the non-operating?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's mainly just maybe a little bit of construction, aid to construction, and the tax money. And then a lot of it is just the grant funds coming in.
And the 1.25 million operating margin loss, where does that money come from?
Well, they'll make up for more part of it in the non-operating margins. And some of that, because some of the grant money goes for construction, but we can use some of it for other, if I remember right.
Some will go to labor.
Some of it will go to the labor costs as well. That will help cover that 1.2 million loss.
Thank you.
Commissioner Collins?
Mike, yes, thank you. Is the discrepancy in the water budget between the operating revenues and the total cost of service due to construction, or are there other issues that are responsible for that deficit?
For the net operating loss, so a lot of us just, estimated the labor cost, outage cost, the maintaining our lines and stuff, it's kind of based on historical. Like I said, some of these numbers will tweak a little bit, because as we budget as far as for workman's comp, time loss, and how the system budgets that. They budget sometimes what the full rate is, and sometimes I take that out because we're already budgeting for the labor costs. So there's some of that I missed. So some of it's just overtime hours, labor, maintaining our lines and stuff is where a lot of that comes from. And some of that will be tweaked a little bit.
What it sounds like you're telling me is that this is related to the cost of providing the service as opposed to construction costs being a part of the figure.
Yes.
That is responsible for the differential.
Yes, this is more for maintaining, not for construction. The construction is in a little bit different part of the budget down the road here a little bit. That's more of the construction would be in the capital budget to build the new line.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Okay. So now kind of looking at the cash flow budget. So if we take the total margins on the electric side of the 6.8, we got about $12.7 million in construction projects. I think that number is probably going to change a little bit based on an email I saw from Kevin. Have to do some additional work. So that number is probably going to change. Then the $587,000 in general plant purchases. That's some improvements here at the 310 yard, warehouse and yard, a couple of truck purchases for the broadband or for the electric side of things. We got around $3.8 million in principal payments. We add back in our depreciation because that's a non-cash expense that's taken out of the margins. So that we have total expenditures of $10 million. So we're going to have to pay another almost $4 million out of reserves to cover everything that we want to do that's budgeted right now in the electric side of things.
And where do we stand on reserves right now? Unrestricted cash reserves?
I don't remember right. I want to say it's around unrestricted. I want to say it's around 10 million. That might be a little bit. I think it's a little bit less than that. Yeah.
Okay.
So on the water side, of course, we're starting off in the hole already. Right now, looking at our 10-year water plan, we have 969,000 in it. We have 60,000 in general plan purchases, which is for a vehicle. For the water side of things, we got about 633,000 in principal. We add back in the $1 million in depreciation. We're still collecting on some LUDs, plus we have the new LED that we'll get money from that hopefully will be finalized next week on that. So their total expenditures is 208,000. So we are still going to have to pay out about 426,000 on the water side of things as well. Commissioner Tupper?
So on the principal on long-term debt, how many different loans is that? Is that more than just the original loan to buy the electric utility, or is that multiple loans?
The majority of that is for the original one. We do have the small one that we took out for the 5.4, which was for the 191 Auto Street, as well as the AMI meters. We haven't drawn down everything off of that loan. So that one may increase because I'm in the process of trying to draw down some additional funds to cover our AMI meters on that loan. So that's multiple loans there.
Again, that's the kind of granularity I think would help to understand some of these numbers, is what exactly are the things that are pushing us to that particular number. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll second that. Maybe just a slide somewhere showing our outstanding debt.
Yeah, I have done that in the past in some of our quarterly updates and stuff. I have done that. I didn't do it in the budget one because, we can add in future meetings. We can bring that
I
up.
think that'd be a good one to throw into the budget process, because I think that's a good question that people have, is where does this organization stand financially? What debts do we have? Which business lines do they fall in? When are they originated? What's the interest rate? What's left on it?
Because we have some public works board monies too. So there are there's other things in our US that we have money borrowed on.
And that's why we do these meetings early, so we can get all these questions
Yeah.
out there. So when we get to the regular budget hearing, we can look like we really got our act together.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
And so the broadband one is one I know. I realized after I was reviewing some of the numbers, I need to tweak a little bit because I think I'm double counting for some of the grant funds in here. As we go through this, I'll explain that. So the total net margins I have is $10 million construction projects, and I don't need to still touch with Will and see where we're at. And those are where we think we're going to be in 25. But right now we have $15 million. No general plant purchases for them. Actually, I think I did put a vehicle in there, but it didn't carry over. And then we do have a loan on theirs too. That principal payment, I think, may be a little bit high. I think we were basing it off of the whole loan. But we have one for the downtown business fire corridor. We add back in a little bit of depreciation we have on those. I'm also showing that from last year, it carried over the $15 million, which was for the construction projects. So their total expenditures only come up to 364, which means they add $10 million into the bank. So on there, they're adding money into the bank just because some of the grant funds are coming in for that.
Okay.
One of the things that is going to help us, or is helping us, at the end of 23, we did bring in the treasurer duties in-house. It's been helping us really through the 24. It's giving us better tracking of our available funds. I just actually got a text from Amanda. Our unrestricted cash is about $7 million in the bank right now, as of today.
Okay.
So we can see on a daily basis what we have in the bank. It's making reconciling our bank accounts a lot easier. It's also giving us greater control over our funds and our bank accounts. And then it's giving us some electronic payment options to our vendors and to our employees through ACH and through wires, just some more control over that. So it's helping us through the cash flow.
Okay.
So I'm gonna just touch base here and then I'm gonna turn this over. So now we're gonna talk a little bit about the safety in the workplace and how we're emphasizing the employee safety as well as public safety in 2025 and beyond. I'm gonna let Melanie and Jeff, but Kevin wants to go first, I guess. Somebody get to go first.
So I'll go first. This is a departure on how we've budgeted in the past. This is important so the board has an active role in safety and building a safety culture at the PUD. So this will be a yearly thing and it will be incorporated into board meetings as we move forward also. So with that, this is a departure, but it's so important to every utility. With that, I want to thank Melanie and her team for taking this on. Thank you.
Dan, looks like you might have a question.
Yeah, just before you get going there, I had a question. I mean, again, the commissioners have had the privilege of seeing the draft budget ahead of time in its entirety, the draft. So I have a question because I'm concerned a little bit about training budget. How much of last budget cycle's training budget is this safety program going to usurp? All right, so how much of the new training budget will this safety program be comprised of in dollars or percentage, either way you want to go with it?
So I don't have the exact numbers or percentages for you, Dan. These are everything that we're going to talk about that Melanie and Jeff are going to talk about here shortly. It's been in the budget. We've always had these in the budget. We've just never called them out specifically what they were for. So this is nothing. It's always been in the budget. This is kind of what you were talking about, the granularity of things. So now we're really calling out some of where and why we budget for some of these things. So don't have the exact numbers or the percentages, but these have all been there in the budget for a number of years. We just never put an emphasis on them like we are for 25.
Okay. Please proceed.
So one of our operational goals at the PUD is to optimize efforts on safety for the PUD workforce and our community. Safety it's already embedded in everything we do here as a public utility, but we're bringing more awareness to that at the board level and the public level as well. Part of that effort, as Mike and Kevin has said, is reflecting those expenses as a separate category in our budget for 2025. So not introducing new dollars into the budget, just really tracking what 2024's expenses were and calling that out for next year. And Jeff is going to talk a little bit more about enhancing our safety culture here and the philosophy behind tracking our expenses.
Yeah. Thank you, Melanie. Jeff Dodd, Safety Manager, PUD. So building a strong safety culture is, just starts really with this budget process is an excellent spot to begin the discussion about all the activities that we do every day to increase employee safety and public safety and environmental safety. So what we've tried to capture here is 3 different buckets that you can kind of get your, as you hear the budget, these items are already in the budget, each, and as Mike had mentioned, have been in it for years. We are just calling out different areas where they are going to be found for 2025. Melanie, anything more to add to that?
I guess I would throw in there, it sounds like what we're saying is like you've got workplace safety, public safety, environmental safety. To me, those are kind of values, organizational values, and you're breaking it down. Okay, how do we take care of and implement those values? And then you're going to show us where we're making investments of the money to protect those values.
Correct. And thank you for bringing that up.
No worries.
Part of increasing safety culture in the workplace is not only getting our teams to talk about safety every day as part of the jobs as they prepare for each job, but it's also getting our leadership, our commissioners, so you can speak to your constituents and you have an idea of the rationale and the importance of these funds and why we're calling them out, is so that you can talk to the constituents about the importance of that, whether that's employee safety, public safety, the things, lots of things that we do inherent to our work is for public safety purposes. And then environmental safety. I mean, there's a wildfire going on right now in Brennan. Certainly the vegetation management that we are budgeting every year speaks right to that horrible incident that's going on now. So we want to try and capture this and raise the commissioner's awareness, raise our own awareness of our leadership, and get it all into one place where we can see it and then begin to live it at all levels of the organization. So hopefully this raised awareness will help the commissioners be able to speak to the constituents as you have discussions at picnics and activities, all county picnics this weekend. We're going to be talking about safety in many different forms at that venue, all in an effort to increase our safety in the workplace and for the public and
Okay.
our customers. So
Please continue.
Yeah, and this is really an explanation behind the philosophy of what goes into this next number that you'll see. So Mike, can you advance the slide? And so the total budgeted for 2025 is, approximately 950,000. And there's several different categories that we tracked to get to this number. Mike, would you be able to speak a little bit more to what's included in, let's say, injuries and damages?
Yeah, just tell us, what does GL account 925 mean?
That's our general ledger account 92510. It's injuries and damages as an RUS account, FERC accounting number. It covers a lot of what we already do for like our safety meetings, our safety protocols, buying the personal protection equipment that is required for crews to go out and to work safely out on the job site. It's water, because we have to provide water, especially during the hot summer time frame, make sure they have the right stuff in the wintertime to stay dry in the, rain gear, things like that. So it's all those costs that we do anyways that are related to preventing injuries, preventing damages, costs in there. And we can bring back in future meetings some of the actual breakdown. I don't have all the actual breakdowns of them right now.
So the things that you just covered, they fall into that first line, that injuries and damages?
Yep, they fall.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is, it says injuries and damages, but it's more for preventing injuries and damages.
Okay,
It's not that somebody's been injured or we've caused damage.
okay.
It's the title is misleading. It's the prevention of injuries and damages and to protect the employees, what we're doing to protect the employees.
Okay.
The activity code 80 employee clothing, that's a lot of the fire retardant, the FR rated clothing for the crews, or even just our field workers to have PUD logo clothing out in the field, so they're identifiable out there. The activity code 83 safety equipment repair and testing, that's the things that's the actual equipment to make them do their job safety. It's the line crews what are called hot sticks, where they can from a distance take the lines out and put lines back in from a distance and not have to be right up there next to the connection as they're doing it. It's their gloves that they have to, the insulated gloves that they have to wear, making sure those get. And then the Department 18 safety, that's a new department that we're just adding. We added a little bit here, well, since Jeff got on board, we added Department 18. So a lot of this is going to be under that Department 18 safety. Right now, we're budgeting mainly just to have Jeff on staff here. It's, labor benefits, fleet cost. Some of these others will flow into that safety department, but that's kind of what these numbers are made up of.
Okay. I guess I have a question about culture. A couple of years ago, we had a situation in Collow Point where there was digging going on and we had crew there and there was a private contractor and we kind of had a near miss on a hot electrical wire. Kevin or Jeff or Melanie, anybody, could you talk a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of changes from, say, that time period to this time period in terms of, Are we seeing a change in culture? Are we seeing improvements in avoiding situations like that because of how we're approaching
Yeah,
safety?
that's there's been a lot of change, I think, since that incident to today, with the way we work and the way we plan work. And I've been here just for the most recent changes, but I'm hopefully part of that change. That's why this is my presence in the crew and in the discussions and after an incident is part of that change. And culture at the PUD, safety culture, getting everybody comfortable with talking about incidents that occur in the past, planning for jobs in the future. All that discussion is the safety culture that we are trying to enhance. And part of enhancing the safety culture is getting everybody from the commissioners through the PUD leadership, the general manager, down to the newest employee engaged in that and start to, break down any walls or barriers that might have been there for them to bring up an issue or ask a question or point out something that they see that doesn't look right so that we can have that throughout the organization. And that's between water, broadband, electric, so that we're that example of the job site where there was a fiber outage. We had multiple teams on those jobs and I was there and I'm taking a picture because I'm thinking this is an excellent example. Planning the job across teams, working safely, it was an emergency work, but doing an excellent job. And it was just, like I saw the change right in front of me that night. So that speaks to, I think the issue that you're bringing up and is an example of what we see going forward. And Kevin's idea of bringing this into the budget process is an excellent way to get the commissioners involved so that you can see some of the costs. And as this matures, this budget discussion matures, we'll bring in other expenses and tie it to safety because we think that it's important and it will raise the acumen of the commissioners and when they can in turn answer questions more thoroughly for the constituents.
Well, and hopefully too, it seems like one of the things that happened back then was a reluctance to bring things forward because then there was a worry about blame as opposed to, oops, this happened. How can we learn from it and not have it happen again and not be worried about blame, but instead be worried about we had a near miss or something almost. How can we avoid it from happening?
Let's
again?
talk about it. Let's
Yeah.
learn from it.
So do you feel like the culture is
Yes.
healthier now that people are willing to talk about things that didn't go quite like they expected? Or
I was not here at the time, but what I see now is cross communication across lines. And that's attributed to this discussion today, Kevin's leadership, the director team, and the commitment to his workplace safety. Certainly there's areas where we're working all the time to improve. And there might be employees who still are maybe feeling hesitant, but that's our goal, is to root that out and get everybody feeling good about it together. And I see Dan's hands up.
Yep, Dan.
So, Mike's already explained the budgetary implications with this. This is money that's already kind of been out there for the most part. And like Jeff just alluded to, that we're going to see things moving forward as we institute this type of plan, that costs could go up. I get all that. As someone who's worked in maybe 3 of the most dangerous professions, there are to be in, I understand the safety component and how important it is across the board. So I'm going to take a little bit different angle on this. I know we're talking internal, but since it's becoming very apparent to me personally, because it's happening within my district, and that is the broadband build out. We're in the first year of 4 or 5 years of a lot of subcontracting, contractors and subcontracting. And how are we going to implement this culture that we're trying to institute or promote ourselves to those people? And I think that has to happen in our RFPs with the bids that we put out there, that I think we really need to emphasize what safety is going to mean to those people when they bid on a job.
That's a good point, Dan. If I understand you correctly, making contractor safety performance part of the RFP process? Is that what I understood, Dan?
I think that is a component that I'm talking about, is maybe a way as a tool. Again, the urgency of it is the real rub. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing, how many chances do you give people, that sort of thing, right? Because you have a signed contract and they say, well, this is how it reads. I think we need to look, when we make bid proposals and put them out there, that this safety component is right up there at the top. That if you damage something, it gets fixed then. You don't proceed with the project until you fix the damage, or you write the procedure that you did wrong. You know, you don't get second, third, fourth chances. This has to be something right up front that you understand there's going to be a price to be paid if you don't adhere to safety.
Thank you, Dan.
We'll keep that in mind.
And then one more thought. And again, Jeff, I appreciate you being here as the safety officer, and I know you're going to do a great job at this. That's where it's going to probably fall on you and the general manager to be, to execute that, right? How do we execute it? It's one thing to say it, it's one thing to write it down, but we have to be in the field and execute it.
I agree. Yeah, thank you, Dan. Kevin,
Well,
anything?
I'm sorry, I've got to respond to that because, just from a risk point of view, and that's what we're talking about here. When we hire a subcontractor, we expect them to, abide by the contract, abide by state law. And it's really important that we not reach over the contract and dictate what's being done. Because that invites additional risk to us, to the PUDs. So we need to, I understand the emphasis, and I believe our contracts cover this directly, but it's important as the owner, when we hire a general contractor, that general contractor has complete control over the site, and we don't. And there's reasons for that, good reasons for that, and there's insurance reasons for that. So, I don't want that to be swept under in this discussion.
But I guess bridging what I'm hearing the two of you say, Joel, I'm hearing that, yeah, we need to keep the contractor and keep the responsibility on their side. And what I'm hearing Dan say is that we need to make sure that the work being done by contractors is up to our standards and that they're being held to it and that they're required to fix things and do things properly. Did I capture that, Dan?
Yeah, I'm not saying that we should override a contract. I'm saying we should look at the contracts before we get into them and have meetings with those bidders or with the ultimate recipients that here's the expectation and here's the execution and of how the PUD is going to look at this and execute it.
Right. Okay. Please continue, Jeff.
Okay, well, so Dan, on that, I agree. And I think that is, if there's opportunities there, that's something that we're looking at. And while contract and safety performance of contractors is integral to each of the jobs that have contractors on right now, if there's room for improvement, we'll work with Joel to make sure we address those and make that part of the safety going forward.
Who mainly deals with when we have contractor work? I realize we've got tree guys, and Dan's bringing up we may have some broadband people who are interacting with them and making sure the work being done is being done as it's supposed to be.
It really depends. For example, on the tree trimming crews, Scott Bancroft kind of manages those. Right now on the broadband side, we have Finley Engineering who monitors quite a bit.
And they have people who are coming here?
Well, they have engineers on site as they're building out to make sure we're compliant.
Okay.
We also have some, like Jose, some of our own personnel that's out there reviewing the work being done. So different projects, we have different people associated with the crews working.
Okay, thank you. Please continue, Jeff.
Next slide.
Whoever's next.
This is just another illustration. If there's any further discussion, we can continue on. Otherwise, I think Jeff captured that pretty well, and thank you, Mike, for jumping into on the specific expenses that went into getting this number for next year.
And my feedback would be, if we're gonna have this in the overall budget presentation, we should probably have a little more information, so we're not dealing with, hopefully, public questions about, oh my gosh, you guys are paying out X in damages every month, you know,
Yeah.
just a little bit more, but good start. And I just know I have a buddy who worked in OSHA compliance in the petroleum sector. And there's a really important reason you do this, so that people don't die or lose limbs. I mean, and talk about expensive. So this is the cost of doing business, and hopefully everybody goes home safe. Please continue.
Yeah, this is just another look month by month, correct, Mike?
Yeah, this is just kind of showing month by month. June last year had a spike. Need to do a little bit more digging into that one, what the spike was for. But this was, just showing monthly budgeted expenses of what we can kind of expect for safety. And as Jeff, Melanie, Kevin, and I have all alluded to, is these numbers are probably going to change. I mean, the dollars are there in the budget, and going forward, we're going to find new things, new expenses that we should consider safety that we haven't considered yet. Where things are going to come up, find out that we need to replace some different equipment to do a better job of safety. So this is just a first start based on historically what's already been in the budget, not adding anything new to the budget for this type of stuff. It is a philosophy on touching base for some of the labor, where and how the people that attend safety meetings, safety committee meetings, charge time to, so we can capture that safety. That's a little bit of a philosophy change for a lot of people that we'll be working on over the next few months to get people to change how they code their time. So that way we can capture more labor to what we spend on safety. Okay, Commissioner Collins?
Can you explain, and this is not a yes or no question, I'm wondering why the spike in June?
I'm gonna have to do a little bit of research on that for you, Ken. To be 100% honest, based on historically, I don't know what happened in June that would have been June of last year. No, yeah, I'm trying to remember what year, which June I grabbed. I'm gonna have to look into that a little bit, but I can send something to the commissioners to kind of explain what the spike was. I don't have that information right off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. Well, this looks like a projection rather than
It's a projection, but it's also based on historical information. So something historically spiked in June of the historical information that I was using.
okay. Thank
So
you.
Yeah, so there is a little bit of research that we'll go into, and I'll let the commissioners know what caused that spike.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, moving on. Unless there's any other questions, we're going to go ahead and move on. And take a little bit closer look at the utility budgets. Doing a comparison of the 24 budget to the 25 budgets, and also showing some budgets for the departments. And there was some discussions on which slide to use here, but I went ahead and used the director's slide, the director's pictures here, because we're going to, in 25, try to do a little bit better where the directors are having more control on what is in their budget and how they're spending the dollars that are budgeted for their departments. So we are the ones that are responsible for the department budgets going forward. So looking at our electric expenses, we got $43.8 million in expenses for the electric side. You can see that 35% is our cost of purchase power. Another 18 is administrative and general expenses. Those are the two big ones, along with our depreciation and amortization expense. Even though that's a non-cash expense, it's still part of that 43.8 million. dollars in expenses. So this is just kind of graphically showing the breakdown of how our expenses are broken out for the electric side of things. Then looking at the electric budget 24 to 25, you can see we have a slight change in our operating revenues, not much, a little bit of cost of services going up. Part of that is in 20, we had some credits through BPA and that we won't get in 25, at least nothing's been said right now. I think those are going away now. And also just with some of the new employees that are coming on is the total cost of services going up, which is making our operating margins to go down a little bit. And then as Kevin alluded to, with some of the construction costs and stuff, we got that kind of figured in there a little bit. So it's affecting our overall total margins by a little bit, which affects our tier and our debt service coverage a little bit too, because they're all based on the operating revenues and the total margins. Going on to the water expenses, we have about $5.5 million in expenses. You can see here it's our operations and maintenance of the systems, as well as the administrative and general expenses are our big three cost drivers of that one. But you can kind of see the breakdown of where and how those expenses are going to go. Again, looking at the water budget from 24 to 25, you can see a little bit increase in the water revenues, big increase in the water budget. We're one of those, excuse me, one of those things we are adding a full-time water director. Before we've had them split kind of in between the two positions and doing multiple things. So their dollars got spread a little bit differently, but this time they're going to be more of the potential of having a water director and the wastewater person for the padlock sewer. So we'll get some cost back, with that as well, that will help reduce some of those total cost of service. But because of the difference, we have a big increase, we have now a deficit in our operating margins, but non-operating margins, we have about the same, but we're losing money. So there's a big difference in the total margins of about $628,000 between the two budgets. Looking at the broadband expenses, $2.2 million. A lot of it still is going to go to administrative and general expenses, just because we're still in the build out process. This will probably change some as we build out, get more customers. Some of those other expenses will probably increase a little bit more because we'll have more customer facing stuff that will have to happen. Commissioner Tupper?
So again, crystal ball time. 2025 at the beginning of the year versus the midpoint versus the end. What do we expect or project for the number of customers we're going to have? Because again, we're getting, somewhat, we all have our own ideas. What metrics are we looking at for this budget cycle to determine how many customers we're going to have? Because we know what our build out schedules are. We should be able to give somewhat of a ballpark idea.
Dan, so we're not 100% sure of our build out schedule. We're working right now to put some things together, but the build out schedule kind of depends on multiple factors such as cash flow and everything we're doing. So we do have some numbers. We'll bring them back or Will can jump in, but we've got some ballpark numbers that we'll have approximately 1,200 people by the end of this year. That's per the grant we're doing over in Quilcene, Discovery Bay. And then depending on how quick we move in 2025 will depend on the next grant area and how those customers come on. But we will see, we're hoping over 2,000 customers minimum by 2025.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that. Like I said, we know we have to be, unless we get another extension, and I'm not aware of that we can or have put in for one, we have to be done with the Olympic Corridor project in November or December. So, all of the mainline work will have been done for sure. I would think by then we will know how many drops we have, how many different fiber to the home possibilities we have. So again, it's a matter of how we light them up. That project will be complete for the most part. It's just a matter of getting the customers signed up and lit up. So I would think that we would have a schedule for what we think that's going to look like.
Yeah, for the grant we're working on now, we do have a schedule. Like I said, it's approximately 1,200 customers by the end of the year.
And again, those are retail customers, not.
Mostly
So-
retail, some wholesale.
Okay, so these are total connections. Who they choose is who they choose. Okay.
Commissioner Collins?
Thank you, Mike. Can we go back to the water budget, 2024, 2025 comparison? So we're looking at a deficit that is north of $500,000. My concern is whether in succeeding years, 2026, 27, 28, are we going to be looking at similar or even potentially greater deficits? And if so, how are we going to cover those costs?
Anybody got an answer for that one?
We do have an answer.
Okay.
Part of this is the rate study we're doing. We're gonna have to make some tough decisions. But there's also, that number looks bad, but there are opportunities for us to go out and get some grant money for water, to get some money from the state. I do believe on the water side, we need to kind of refocus similar like we did on broadband and really work hard to get some additional funding. Because some of the projects we need to do are expensive and we just don't have the customer base to do some of this work.
Which I would just like to add, by doing some of the capital projects like what Kevin was mentioning, that reduces some of the maintenance cost and the overtime outage, the middle of the night water main breaks, we have to then pay overtime, higher, we're paying prevailing wage. Contractors are charging us more because we're calling them out in the middle of the night to help dig and stuff. So it's a give and take a little bit between capital and maintenance type jobs. So.
Thank you.
What's next?
Dan's got.
Yeah, so I appreciate Commissioner Collins's question because it's relevant again, and obviously the rate study and the cost of service matters. So, and again, like I alluded to, is we're in the last year of the previous rate schedule, and we're going to have to make some decisions, before the middle of 2025. So again, on the hiring, going back to the number of positions we're looking at. I don't know that we've done it yet. It sounds to me like the water director position, from what I just heard about the amount of work that needs to be done on the water side, should be a priority. And we should be getting that description and that job out there. Maybe it is. I might be behind what's current events, but I think that is just one more reason why on the water side to deal with this deficit. If we have to go after more funding, we have to do other things. That's going to take a lot more time and effort to go after those funds to determine, what that process moving forward is going to be. So it's a kind of a capacity issue to me that should be a priority position that we are looking at right now, not waiting till 2025. That one's one we should be working on between now and the end of the year. And maybe we are.
Kevin, do you mind if I speak on that a little bit? Dan, we are looking at that. We recognize the urgency of that position. It was added to our organizational structure. The job description is being worked on, and we think that position will go out in the next couple weeks.
Thanks for the update. Appreciate it.
So yeah, going back to the broadband, compare the two, and just to kind of allude, I think when Kevin and I kind of talked, I think we estimated 600 connections, residential connections. So that's kind of how I used to come up with based on the revenues we already had, plus figuring about 600 connections per month on residential customers. Just so to kind of give a little bit clarity on the operating revenues based on on what our current rate is. Yes, Commissioner Tupper?
Yeah, again, on the broadband revenues there, I ask this question every time, and Will probably knows what's coming, and that is, how are we looking at, because it's not residential, but the service that, you know, the loan we took out and the service we're providing in Port Townsend, what's the revenue outlook or the cost outlook for that? Is it captured in this, or is it separate?
I don't believe it's captured in this completely, Dan. If Mike's estimating 600 connections, we'd be adding more connections. But we have not begun official construction on that area. We have done very small projects and used very little of that loan money. That project will go out to bid for construction in 2025. And we won't see the revenues until after that construction is complete.
Great.
And we won't see the majority of the loan payments until that, all the loan money is used up as well.
No, thanks. It's good to know which budget cycle stuff is likely to hit in or fall in, and, you know, how much preparatory, you know, work we have to do. And so I appreciate it. Thanks.
And does that loan have a deadline that we have to use it, or it goes away, or how does that all work?
2026.
So we have to use it by then, and then it's per the contract, we start paying on it once we've
We
drawn the
start
funds
paying
in.
it as we draw funds, yeah.
Good,
We've
okay.
already-
Sounds like you're on it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so no, it's, when Kevin and I talked about it, we just looked at the residential. We didn't look, because that's most of where we're,
Mhm.
the grant areas that we're working in is residential customers and not anything else. So,
It sounds like that commercial revenue is probably not going to be coming in 2025
Right.
anyway.
yep.
Okay.
So, yeah, for a while, the broadband revenues are going to be kind of a moving target as we
Mhm.
complete projects and stuff. So,
Mhm.
so then this is just overall looking at the expenses by category, you know, the $51.5 million. You know, you can see kind of breaking down a little bit more. Our labor and benefits and our power costs are the big cost drivers here. You know, about 58% of that is, but just between those two things, with everything else making up a little bit, you know, so the just kind of showing where and how the expense dollars are being spent. Commissioner Tupper?
Sorry, I should have looked it up. What was our budget last year? How, is this on par, below, or over? I think it's under, isn't it? What last year's overall budget was?
I think it's pretty well on par. I don't remember right off the top of my head on for the overall utility, what we spent, what we budgeted, but I think it's pretty close to being right about there. Because we didn't really increase anything too terribly much. And then just kind of moving on from there, the expense allocations by department, you know, kind of breaking down, we have 18 departments. So just looking, you know, how each one, the labor and benefits, administrative and general expenses, contracting, this is maintenance and upkeep of buildings, it's contractors for helping to do maintaining lines out in the field, the tree trimming contractors. Then we have our professional consulting services. This is, you know, Joel's time, this is Dawn's time, and our auditor times, and other people that come in and help us out. The fleet, the vehicle usage. And the safety here is just a small portion of the actual safety, because some of the other ones are in there. It's just calling out a little bit of the one code, the code 83. I didn't call out everything, but kind of showing out where and how that safety split out between the different departments. So you can see that department wise, not including our depreciation and some of that, for departments, we're $23 million in just those type of costs being spread out to the different departments. And then this is, you can kind of just a graphic showing the expenses by that $23 million, how it's split out between the different departments. Of course, the executive department is one of the bigger ones, along with the electrical line crew and the electric operations crew. That's the dispatch metering teams, you know, make up the three biggest ones. That's and the executive department includes the commissioners as well. And there's this, but it's all the directors and admin assistants that we have there. And now we're going to kind of jump we've been talking about revenues and expenses, the day-to-day type operating expenses. Now we're going to kind of jump into some of the balance sheet related costs. And these are our capital projects, our principal loan payments that are focused on assets and liabilities that aren't related to those operating expenses. So here's some of our capital projects and debt principal costs for 25. There again, we need to probably tweak the broadband work plan. You know, just kind of kept it in what we had, the $15 million prior before. We do have one new broadband vehicle, $60,000. Contracted engineering is $105,000. This is ICPE HDR engineering for project related costs, just preliminary engineering costs to help us with look at projects. The electric fleet, we got 2 new vehicles at $60,000 a piece. Tools, it's tools that are over $5,000 for the electric and broadband folks. We got $100,000 there. The electrical work plan, this is a 4-year work plan that we kind of talked about a couple weeks ago. That we'll still have to bring to the board as we finalize it for approval, but we got about $12.7 million in it. Facilities improvements, we got about 30,000. Information technology to replace a server, about 35,000. We got about 4.8 in long-term debt principal payments we need to make. A couple $100,000 in warehouse and yard improvements. Another $60,000 for our water vehicle, and the water work plan based on the 10-year work plan is $969,000. So between our capital projects and our loan payments, we got a little over $34 million that we are budgeting for in 25. And kind of alluding what Jeff was asking us about before the meeting. The vehicles, we're not sure whether we're going gas or electric on the vehicles yet. We're just kind of budgeting, putting out there what we're looking at. We're going to have to look at, Kevin and I and Kenny, our fleet manager, will take a look at what the needs are and what's out there available for the different vehicles. Commissioner Tupper?
Yeah, again, coming from a granularity position here. So how are we looking at or budgeting for, where does this show up? Cyber defense, site security, increased IT costs, the more employees we have, the more at risk we become. We have more sites now that are more critical to copper theft or whatever it may be. What's our budget for that? Where are those things captured, and in an accumulative manner, what does that all add up to? How much of a budget do we have for those related things?
I'll ask a follow-up. Did that fall into safety at all, or is that not considered safety?
That's kind of partially fall into safety. And to answer some of those, it's going to depend on the cost. If to become a capital item, capital budget item, and become an asset for us, it has to be over $5,000 or more, and a year or longer useful life. If not, then it's an operating expense item, and we don't necessarily budget those out based on those type of items. They fall into certain categories, but we don't budget out based on those type of items on where they at. But it all depends on. So some of that is in the improvements, the facilities improvements. So, there's not much there because it's more facilities here. But in some of the work, the electric work plan and some of that stuff, the water work plan, the broadband work plan, that's where some of those long-term high dollar or the security of the stations that we have out there, the substation, the huts, the water well houses, things like that. That's where those costs are included in.
And to some extent, we don't want to talk about what we're doing, but I guess the question I have is, are we going to be investing in security and monitoring in 2025? Is that going to be in the budget?
That's kind of the question I asked. I guess it should be going directly to Kevin on what his plan is moving forward for those items.
Mike here.
So yes, we have a lot of security issues. Some of these dollars will actually be spent in 2024. Melanie and Jeff are working on, for example, remote cameras in different substations. We're working with Will on the new fiber deployment to bring more information back from different areas. So we have a lot of ambitious plans. We have partnered with people who know how to do security, for example, Energy Northwest. So I feel comfortable, the dollars are there. We don't talk a lot about the things we do and why, but there are dollars there for cybersecurity, physical security, and there's ongoing projects as we speak on all these things being tied together.
Yeah, excuse me, I just wanted to make sure that, you know, this is a priority within the utility, that, and that the public understands that it is a priority for us.
Next slide.
So this is just kind of, showing graphically, we started showing some graphs the last few years just to kind of give a better presentation of where and how the dollars are spent. So you can kind of see that between the electric work plan, the broadband work plan, that's 80% almost of where we're at. A lot of our dollars are going to either broadband or the electric work plan for 25. Everything else just gets a little portion, but those two are the two big ones. And that's because, and we will get the money back for the broadband work plan, but we have to put the money out first. And, electric work plan, as was alluded to a couple weeks ago, we have a lot of work that needs to be done to get that system, to improve our system and for reliability, for resiliency, for safety. So that's, you can kind of see where and how those dollars are being spent there. That is everything.
Okay.
That is the highlight of the budget.
So I know we have another item. Do commissioners have any discussion or questions or things we'd like? And I guess when is the next time we'll see the budget?
I don't know when the next.
So our plan is to have smaller, very small little snippets at each board meeting coming up.
Okay.
So where Mike may focus on a particular issue the commissioner has or fine tune some numbers that staff has come about. So in almost every board meeting moving forward in managers report, Mike will give a little brief statement or a discussion.
But the next full one won't be until the October hearing?
No, we'll have one prior to the October hearing.
Okay, will that be in September? Then?
Has to
Probably
be.
gotta be.
We're out of time in October.
Yeah, or in August.
Yeah.
Or August.
Okay, Dan, did you have something?
Yeah, and we didn't touch on it, how it impacts or it works into the budget process here, but we talked about it last meeting, and that is the impact that we could and probably are going to feel about how low income is going to impact us. How are we budgetarily looking at the impacts from what the state might mandate or things that we want to do on our own when it comes to low income? What budget impacts or revenue complications does that pose?
So what we've done, and Gene has worked and given information to FCS. FCS is going to work that into the rates because that's where those dollars are going to have to be picked up at.
And one more follow-up, and that is on the tree trimming. I know that originally in the 10-year plan, we saw a couple weeks ago, I saw a number of $1 million or $1.5 million. I see now that's been trimmed, no puns intended, trimmed back to $1 million, which is 200,000 more than the last budget. So any comments about the vegetation management and tree trimming, where we're going with that?
So the difference between the million and $1.5 million is we're hoping some of the broadband work we do is actually capitalized versus expensed. And that means it would be charged to the broadband division. And to what extent, we don't know yet. So they're still fine tuning those numbers, but that is the discrepancy.
This would be vegetation work that's done at the same time that the fiber is going up, so it can be part of the capital project.
That it can be capitalized at the first
Okay.
goal.
Yeah, so what the rules are on that is your first pass through on tree trimming, you can capitalize. Anytime after that, it has to be an expense,
Right.
according to our US
Right.
guidelines.
Part of putting it in the first time.
Yep.
After that, it's maintenance. Got it.
So
Any-
another question relates to the cover sheet on the budget moving forward, that it's a 3% increase on certain items moving forward. My question is the current rate of inflation versus the inflation that maybe in 2025 is 3% increases? How does that fall with inflation and everything that goes along with that? You know, the consumer price index, whatever you're using.
So I did look at the consumer price index at various times throughout the last year, and they were all averaged right around 3%. As what I was looking at. So that's where I came up with the 3%. Now, if it's something that happened like it did in 23, where all of a sudden inflation rates skyrocket, well, that's something we can't really budget. It's hard to budget for and plan for, but based on the last years of the consumer price index, it was 3% on average. Everything I looked at was right around 3% is how I came up with that number.
Thanks. I think that's all I have for the moment.
Okay, do commissioners have any closing thoughts on the budget, or should we move on to the next item? Hearing Ken?
Yeah, so I understand with broadband that we get reimbursed out of the grant money for money that we spend. But does that put the PUD at any kind of a risk in terms of the time gap between what has to be put out and what is coming back?
I guess that could be, do we have enough money in the bank to pay for stuff until we get reimbursed?
So the state's actually been pretty good. It's been only taken about a week, 2 weeks,
2 weeks.
for us to get reimbursement. So we're not out. It's not like we're out money for months at a time. Right now the state's pretty quick about getting those funds as soon as we turn them in. So we're only out money a couple of weeks, and we're not out months at a time. So yes, it hurts us because we're spending that money up front, but we're getting it back fairly quickly too. So.
All right, that makes me feel a bit better. Thank you.
It is a concern, though. That's why we're trying to space projects out a little bit, so that we're not getting these huge swings. So we look at that very closely and watch it.
Do you have another one? Or
And
you-
that- And I'll dovetail into that. It was my last comment here was, I'm concerned about reserves. And that's what Commissioner Collins, I think, was just alluding to, is, you know, we have a policy that says we have to keep 90 days on a $52 million budget. That's $13 million in reserves. You know, what is our, excuse me, what is our policy in 2025 going to be for how long we let, you know, our reserves lapse, or how low we let them lapse? I think that's a discussion as part of this budget process we should decide up front as to what that's going to look like. Because to Kevin's point, we have to decide how to space projects. We have to determine cash flow. And I think that's an important part of this, is do per our own policy. 13 million is the reserve. So that's something we should be having a discussion about all the way through this process.
And I'll chime in that I just remember last year that the budget went really smoothly. So I know you're throwing some new stuff at us. I would encourage you to follow as much as you can the formatting and how you presented the information last time. You know, if you've got some new things you want to provide, great. You know, we asked about outstanding loans, having that in there. You've got the safety stuff you're kind of introducing as a new thing. We've probably got more information on broadband than we've had in the past. But I'm a believer in that if you've got something that works, don't, you know, try and reinvent it. That you've done really well in evolving our budget information. So I encourage you to use what has been working well.
Yeah. So in the actual that I sent to you, the budget packet that I sent does follow the same format. We just decided this year, Kevin and I kind of talked about it, to kind of present it instead of just pulling up a PDF and going through it.
Yeah.
To kind of have the PowerPoint presentation and highlight some of the key areas, not just go line by line.
It's an introduction. So I
Yep.
think it's appropriate how you handled it. Okay. If there's nothing else, are we ready to move on to the next agenda item? Going once?
I just want to thank Mike and his staff and everyone else involved with the presentation for your hard work and trying to make this as transparent as possible.
And I'll second that.
And I know we've got Rod on the line. I don't know if there's any other members of the public who, if anybody wanted to say anything at this point before we move on to the next agenda item, give you a chance. Going once, going twice. No takers. Okay. So the next agenda item is an executive session. Sorry.
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah. Let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll reconvene for our executive session. Then after that, we have no other business planned. So if you want to tune out now, you can tune out now. So let's take a 5-minute break and come back at 11:55. And here comes Kevin. Good. Let's see. It's still morning barely. It is 11:56 and we are resuming our special meeting of the Jefferson Public Utility District Board of Commissioners. We are now on item 5 of our agenda, which is an executive session. Do we know how long this one is going to take?
I would say an hour.
Okay.
I
So-
have a hard stop at 1.
Okay. So we have an executive session per RCW 42.30.110 subsection I subsection G to review the performance of a public employee, and we are estimating it will take us an hour, which takes us to 12:57. And we are now going into executive session. It is 12:58. We have completed our executive session and we have reached the end of our business for this agenda. So I will thank everybody for their work today and we stand adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.